Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on Social Science Data Management and Curation. I am Mingbu Wang, the current convener of the ACRL Numeric and Geospatial Data Services in Academic Libraries Interest Group. We are very happy to have Jerry Delisle, the Director of Curation Services from ICPSR, to give us a presentation today on resources and tools that are good for social science data management. So we will have a question and answer session at the end of the seminar. Please feel free to post your questions to the chat box during the presentation. I will be monitoring and gather the questions. I also want to thank Alison Payne, the program coordinator of ACRL, who has been supported diligently to set up the webinar. Now, without further delay, let's welcome Jerry to start his presentation. Jerry, you can start.
Thanks, Ming, and thanks to everyone who signed up today for this webinar. It's really great to be able to talk about some of the tools and services, and as well as a lot of guidance that's out there, both from where I work at ICPSR, but at other repositories and organizations that are doing great work. I should say Amy Pienta, our Director of Acquisitions, isn't able to be here today, and she sends her apologies. She's, in addition to being the Director of Acquisitions, she's the Director of one of our topical archives, the National Dictionary and Foreign Data Archive, and is in the midst of doing a proposal for them. So she, again, sends her apologies. Today I want to talk about social science data management and curation. Ming Lu asked me to highlight some of the resources that we have on our site, and so I'm going to try and do that, and again point to not only what we have, but what others have out there. And really, as a background, I think a number of people on this webinar are here because of a few things. One, the many new types of data out there. We hear quite a bit about big data, whatever big data means to you or to whoever's describing it. For me, it can, and traditionally it's meant in the social sciences, survey research data. We have census data, we have opinion polls, but over time we know that those have grown in size and complexity. We have all new types of data out there, anything from network analysis to video data. Here's a safety pilot project here in Ann Arbor. It's where they're connecting thousands of cars, trucks, and buses with sensors and video, and I think they're even going to do some surveys, and they're collecting a massive amount of data per year. At ICPSR, we've actually archived some data that were sponsored by the Gates Foundation. It included a large number of surveys, as well as video data from student classrooms. So all different types and formats of data that are out there and available and being generated. It's, as we know, increasing every year. We also know that there are new incentives and discussions around data. In the United States, it was especially kicked off last year in February with this memo from the Office of Science and Technology Policy asking federal agencies receiving more than $100 million in research and development expenditures, funding or providing that money to develop plans to make data as well as publications, but the data included, publicly available, and asked for specific things or topics to address. From that, there were some pretty significant editorials and papers in the press about data. This is from Van Berman and Vince Cerf, big names who will pay for public access to research data. Excuse me. This was an editorial in the New York Times encouraging for publicly funded research to be made publicly available. from last year. There were really big names in the research field who were emphasizing the importance of data collection and tacitly, I think, also sharing those data. This is from the Nobel laureate in economic science, Robert Shiller, saying there's an attitude that collecting data is for lesser people, and then he goes on and says some of the best theorizing comes after collecting data because then you become aware of another reality. I know he's actually put out some of his own data. And this is something I read in October last year, just a few months ago. But we also know, even though there's always a sunny horizon and a lot of opportunities and expectations surrounding data, challenges remain, and the reality remains that sharing and preparing and archiving data, we still have some work to do. Even though we know that there are many benefits, it saves money, it allows for verification and replication, it supports the scientific community, that the actual behaviors of researchers doesn't always match the attitudes. So here's a recent study that was done where this person went out, he and his colleagues, and attempted to locate and obtain data from papers from, let's see, from a particular journal, I believe. We found that 37% of the data from papers published in 2011 still existed, but this fell to 18% for 2001 and 7% for 1991, so a significant drop. He says researchers should be able to obtain published data from the authors long after the study is complete, but we found that almost all research data was lost 10 to 15 years after publication. The main causes of data loss appear to be a lack of working emails for the authors, just being able to contact them, and the data being stored on outdated hardware. Another study that was reported came from out of the University of Mississippi, where they looked at articles from the Annals of Internal Medicine and compared the availability of willingness of data from 2008 to 2012. And they say of 389 articles, 17% stated that protocol were available without conditions, 54% with conditions, and 29% not available. Statistical code was available without conditions for 6%, with conditions for 66%, and unavailable for 28%. And then finally, data were available without conditions for only 7%, with conditions for 47%, and unavailable for close to half, so 46%. And their conclusions, while the majority of authors stated that they would make study materials available to others, most would do so only if others contacted them and attached requirements to the sharing of this information. Researchers are most willing to fully share their protocols and least willing to share their data. So still a ways to go as far as both finding access to data, even recent data, and then the willingness of researchers to share their data. Here at ICPSR, we did some studies recently. This was a few years ago in 2009, where we looked and attempted to identify and obtain data from the social sciences that were funded by the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health. And at that time, we found that only about 14% had been archived, about two-thirds, a little under two-thirds still had a copy of the data, and that over a quarter of the data that we attempted to retrieve had been lost, either due to retirement or computers crashing or fires or what have you. There's still a lot of work to do. I think most people here on the webinar have heard about best practices for data management and curation. We know that when data are well managed during the data collection and prepared and enhanced, that's the ideal. We also know that even after data collection, there's quite a bit you can do to curate it and then enhance it, even when the data are messy. That's not always ideal, but it's doable, and that's often done by a repository or by a library. And so I'm going to highlight some of the resources that we provide, as well as others provide, about some of these data management curation steps. Curation and management is that, again, the enhancing and ensuring that the data are complete and independently and able to be analyzed. First, I should just give a little quick background of where I work. I'm at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. ACRL is formerly the Inter-University Consortium for Political Social Research. We've been around since 1962. We have over 500,000 visitors each year looking at data. We are a membership-based organization, but we also are supported in large part by federal and non-government sponsors who sponsor our topical archives, anything from criminal justice to education to addiction, substance abuse. These are a few of our topical archives. Some examples of popular data we have: general social surveys, monitoring the future, national election studies. As an archive and as a repository, what we do are a few things. We acquire, curate, and archive social science data. We then distribute it to researchers in both the metadata or the information about the collections, as well as the data in numerous formats to make it easier for them to use, both on their desktops and in the browser. We have large missions to preserve the data for future generations. And then we also have a large summer program, over 1,000 students this last year, and provide training in quantitative methods. And more recently, we've also provided courses in curation and data management. We have over 8,000 data collections. So we have some unique capabilities. These aren't just unique to us, to other repositories, and as I'll mention as I go through what we have, the resources we have, these are things that anyone can do with enough time and resources invested. One is curating data with rich metadata, digital preservation, bibliography and citation, confidential data, training, and then a large community that supports this enhancement and preservation of the resources. I'm going to be using the data management curation page on our website, and this is the URL is there. I encourage you to go there yourself. That all of this is available anytime for you to review and use. Please feel free to use, and also if you have suggestions, please do contact me. Or questions, but especially suggestions on new content or if anything doesn't make sense or can be enhanced. I should also pause here and just say, if you have any questions for me, I think the way to do that is to enter it into your question pane, and then I believe Ming Lu or Allison will be compiling those, and we'll be able to ask you either at the very end or if they're urgent as we're going along. I'm just going to take a little drink of water.
Yeah, I will be monitoring the chat box.
I'm sorry, Mingwen?
We'll be monitoring the chat box.
Yeah. Okay, great.
With your question there, I will be.
Okay, great. So it looks like Mingwen's monitoring the chat box. So I'm going to start talking about data management and curation. We're following, we've divided this page into 6 sections: quality, preservation, access, confidentiality, attribution, tools and services. And this was somewhat in response to the memo. It helped us re-emphasize or emphasize certain aspects of data management and curation. So I'm going to divide the rest of my presentation into these sections. The first I'm going to talk about is data quality. And by data quality, what we talk about here is that a well-prepared data collection contains information intended to be complete and self-explanatory for future users. So we don't necessarily check to ensure that that the data provided by the PI is matches the statistical tests that they might or analyses that they might do in a paper, or even that it's accurate. What we do is we'll ensure that the collection is complete, that the documentation and data match each other, and that you can independently use these data both now and in the future without having to go back to the original investigator to ask about how to use the data. You might go back to them about questions on how they specific analyses or other questions, but to ensure that it's complete and self-explanatory. The other aspect of data quality is while you're ensuring that it's complete and well-formed, that you do no harm, that you're not making unintentional changes to the collection that would alter it in any way that differs or that would make it significantly change from how the investigator intended. And we'll talk about that in a second. On our website, there's the Guide to Social Science Data Preparation and Archiving. This is the compilation of information and best practices that we use here internally. There's some other resources out there I'll mention in a second. They're also great. There's the URL. And then on the site, we also describe some of the steps that we take here internally. I should say that Guide to Data Preparation Archiving discusses a lot of the management aspects as you're preparing and collecting the data as an investigator. And if you're a librarian or other person who's providing research support to these investigators, helping them prepare and getting the data ready for archiving. We also discuss here, this is a diagram of our own internal pipeline process, the steps we take to check data before they're preserved and archived in a repository, steps we take to enhance the data, to create the metadata and so forth. Many of the data sets that we get in are quantitative files, although we do get qualitative files, other types of data. For these quantitative files, as well as other types of data, we check to see how complete and clean they are. This is a screenshot of something I just found out there on the internet. You can see examples of missing codes, missing values. It looks like this was an Excel file or something on the internet where they color-coded values or used that to highlight missing or unspecified values. And so really, if you were a user, you'd have a lot of questions probably about what this means. What do the ones mean? So things we look for are variables described, are values described, are they labeled, do they make sense? Here's an example of an age variable where we look at the frequency output and there's a value of -1. That might describe a missing value, it might be a miscode, and so we would document that and help and ask the researcher what's going on. Here's a variable that's unlabeled. Here's an age variable where it looks like it's just a range from 18 to 41, and so was that intentional? Well, in this case, it probably wasn't, unless 41 is some sort of missing value or values describing everyone outside of the survey or the group of respondents asked this particular question. And so in this case, we might ask the investigator, gee, did you intend to top code 41 or condense everything into this age category? And maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Here's a variable where you have some foreign characters, those big blobs, for instance, in between economy and Obama. That probably signals that the data, when they were transferred to you, perhaps were scrambled, or you're opening them up using a wrong encoding scheme. Something's at issue, and so another flag that you would want to ask the investigator for help. Of course, when you're creating and collecting the data, you can take steps to ensure that things are labeled, that they're accurately described, that they're in formats that you can understand. Similar to the data and the documentation, we want those to be complete and well described and accurate. For documentation, traditionally we've had code books or user guides, and really you just want them to be fully fleshed out enough so that if you're looking at the data and you have a question about a variable or a value, you can go back into the code book and learn more about it and see what the value was, what maybe there's question text. Sometimes in code books there are frequency listings, so you can do a basic sanity check. There might be missing codes. This is from a large survey of the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, where it's a very well documented code book. As I mentioned, when we do any type of data review or data enhancement, data curation, we keep a log of all of the processing work we do, or using a syntax file within the particular statistical package that we use, so that we can both keep a listing of the questions we have before we ask the investigator or the researcher, or if you're collecting the data, so you can keep track of the changes you've made to the data collection. And then when we're ready to make any changes or transformations to the data collection and receive permission from the investigator, we'll then use that setup file to transform or make any enhancements to the file, whether these are changing labels or recoding values or anything else. And this is just so that we can ensure that what we're doing is correct, complete. It goes through internal quality review checks, so another person here checks it. It's almost like checking another person's code, as well as if we need to in the future, let's say 10 years down the road, review what that file looked like and what steps we took as a repository to make changes. We can look at that, what we call processing history file or setup file. So I mentioned we have our guides. There's some other great guides out there. This is from the UK Data Archive, managing and sharing data, URLs down there at the bottom. Data One has some guides out there. This is a primer on data management. This comes out of TDAR, which is for archaeology data. They partnered with the Archaeology Data Service in the UK. They have a guide for archaeology data, although it's useful for other traditional social science and social and behavioral science data. So that's on the quality review. And again, I just want to stress quality and ensuring that data collection is enhanced and complete and independently understandable is really an essential role that librarians and repositories can play in ensuring that data can be used over time. I think it's one thing, and it's great to store data and to preserve data as is, but it's an even better thing at times for repositories and for researchers and for librarians to be able to enhance the data to ensure that it's completely usable over time. So along with that quality and independent understandability is the aspect of confidentiality. The social and behavioral sciences are dealing more and more with confidential data, disclosure risk and disclosure issues. So when individual subjects, human subjects have responded to a survey or participated in a study, can potentially be identifying what are the steps you could take. There's a page on our site that discusses some of the steps we take. That includes safe data, safe places, and safe people. So safe data, modifying the data to reduce the risk of re-identification. Safe places, including disseminating it through a secure access mechanism, and training people so that they understand both how to identify data that have disclosure issues and then what are some of the data use agreements or things you can do when preparing the data to ensure that the data are safe and that you can disseminate them as widely as possible, even though there might be disclosure issues. With safe data, there are a number of things to watch out for. I didn't mention them here, but you're checking for direct identifiers. It's still surprising how many data collections that come in here to ICPSR. Not a huge number, but still a few that we see from time to time that have direct identifiers, and telephone numbers or even social security numbers. Usually it's on accident, but those are things that you can immediately check and find. Indirect identifiers are a little bit more difficult to find, but it's still something that many people can do once trained. These are anything from maybe you live, there was a survey done of religion, and it was in a state with a small population, and the religion, there were just a few respondents who were of a particularly unique religious faith. And so it would be particularly easy or very easy potentially to identify those respondents based on those 2 or 3, let's say you also have a zip code or even region of that state. Potentially easy for someone to identify who that respondent was. Now, if it were, depending on the type of survey, if it were a highly sensitive survey, we'd be asking questions about sexual activity or political views, then you really would never want that information to be disclosed or for those individuals to be discovered. And so there's some things you can do, and with the safe data, you could suppress unique cases. So maybe those unique respondents will be removed from the data file. The group values or top code, swap values, aggregate geographic area. So those unique respondents, let's say there's a small cell count, maybe 10 to 15 respondents. If you group them all together, that's a potential way to ensure that the data are safer. You're not completely removing the risk, but you're doing all you can to limit disclosure. There are other things to do, replacing real data with synthetic data. Of course, anytime you make changes to data, you're changing the properties of the file, and you're potentially limiting the reanalysis value or the ability. And so for some of these things, like checking for direct identifiers and having the investigator yourself remove them, that's a no-brainer. Or replacing real data with synthetic data, or adding or perturbing files. Those are you definitely want to have a statistician or a disclosure professional help you in making those changes. But still lots that the average person who have some data know-how can do to ensure that the data can be safer. There's some further resources out there to make data safe, about disclosure methodology, and confidentiality and privacy regulations. In addition to making the data safe, there's safe places. So As a repository or a library, when you're receiving data, you can have a secure deposit form, ensure that you're processing it in a secure environment. You can have data protection plans in place so that when people apply and access the data, that they complete a plan on how they're going to store it and use the data safely. As a repository, you can have virtual data enclaves where people can analyze the data in the cloud through a secure server. And for highly restricted or sensitive data, you can even have an enclave in your facility that's locked down. We have one here at ACRL in our sub-basement in a locked room where the computers aren't attached to the network. We have someone who's monitoring the output. Of course, that also limits the usability and reuse of data, but for highly sensitive material, it's an option. This just is a screenshot of our virtual data enclave. We provide this for many of our collections now, where if you find it on our website, a data collection that is restricted, you'll be able to apply for access and then be able to use the data through your browser, which is nice. And the other nice aspect is that within this VEE, there are statistical packages that you can use to analyze the data. Here's some further resources from our site. And then last thing with confidentiality is safe people. We have training here internally that people who touch the data or process the data go through to know what to look for and to know what to do when you're dealing with data and you find direct or indirect or even tangential relationships among data that could disclose respondents. There's also the aspect of data use agreements. So tailoring language such as responsible use statements, a research plan, data protection plans, security pledges. Here's some resources for safe people. This top one, the example NADAP restricted data use agreement, actually the middle one, are both really great resources on language and protocols that you use when restricting data, and especially disseminating data. So the third thing to talk about when curating and managing data, and it's also on our site, is the whole issue of preservation. And it's one thing to make data available. It's another to ensure that the data are going to be long-lived or available a year from now or 10 years from now. So here's a great example. When I was in college, I did a lot of my papers on these floppy disks. Now it's virtually impossible, at least here on campus, to find a computer with a 3.5-inch floppy disk. So it's not just the media that these data are on, but it's also the formats. I think this was an acidic format. It surprisingly can still be converted into a readable ASCII or regular data file, but it's something you have to have a tool to use and some know-how. So there's some hardware, software formats. Digital preservation is a unique set of requirements. I took this from a set of slides that Beth Yeakel, who's a professor at the School of Information here at the University of Michigan, did a couple of years ago. And she talked about digital preservation includes persistence, reliability, scalability. You're not only preserving the bits, but the meaning, and then cost. We know that it's not as cheap, as we think and sometimes believe it is to store data, or sometimes the storage costs can be higher than we think, especially if we don't plan for them. There are a number of vulnerabilities of digital information, anything from neglect to human-induced errors to technology obsolescence, to the many different types and formats of files. And then, of course, there's the sustainability. So as one of those studies, the Vine study I mentioned earlier, just we know that data are lost because investigators just either don't use the files anymore, or inertia. They lose the disks, or they don't care anymore about the data. It's not as important to them. And so having them in a repository that can sustain and support access to these files for long term is essential and really valuable. File formats is another issue, especially in the social sciences. We deal oftentimes with proprietary packages, anything from SPSS to SCADA. Will these formats be supported in the long term? That's an open question. What we do at ICPSR is we will normalize some of the file formats. So we'll normalize it into an ASCII file that's described with data documentation initiative, DDI, metadata, as well as setup syntax files as a preservation copy of data, so that we're pretty certain that we'll be able to read a raw ASCII file with some descriptive metadata a number of years and very long into the future. With proprietary software, we're not as sure. And then the expertise of a repository or a library can also be valuable, especially when the main repository or a specialized data curation services in the library has the day-to-day know-how of dealing with files. That can be invaluable. So when working with preservation issues, it's always great to have some policies available and in place, especially if you're planning on preserving things over the long term. What are your policies with respect to how long you preserve files? Will you normalize? Will you migrate and move format from one format to another over time, migrate media from one piece of media to another, will you refresh content? All different types of policies that we should develop. What about disaster planning policies? These are all, again, available on our website. And these were developed by Nancy McGovern, who's done a lot of work with digital preservation. In addition to preservation policies, there are repository assessments. So these are assessments that a repository can do to ensure that it is following good practices and that it can be trusted. There's a saying, trust but verify. And so there are some repository assessments out there in the wild. There's the very rigorous track ISO international standard for trusted digital repositories. A number of steps and requirements that a repository can work through. Very rigorous, but also goes a very long way to show that you as a repository have taken steps, that you're organizationally and technologies in place and procedures are in place that, to ensure that the data that you curate and manage and preserve will be available at the time. There are some lighter weight assessments. There's a data seal of approval as opposed to the ISO standard, which has 80 or 90 plus requirements. Data seal of approval is just, I believe, 16, somewhere around 16 requirements or questions that you can complete yourself. It goes then through a peer review, and then once you're certified, you can put this seal on your website and show to others that you've taken some steps to be transparent and also that you're following community guidelines. The World Data System also has an assessment that's available. All good steps repositories can take. Even if you don't want to go through the formal certification process, it's still great to review these. especially to ask yourself, or as a repository, hey, am I doing this, or this? And that's why we've been going through a track review, and you know, it's been great to, even though it's a very detailed process, to be able to sharpen our own skills and procedures internally, especially when they're lacking, or when we're finding gaps, and to continually sharpen the stuff and to review those over time. So a number of steps you can take to ensure that preservation is an essential part, or a critical part of what you do to manage and curate data. Fourth thing we talk about is attribution, and this was specifically mentioned in the OSCP memo. And attribution is ensuring that data producers receive credit for their archived data, but it also shows funders that that the research that they're supporting is being used, and how it's being used. And it also allows for people to replicate studies and analyses. Here's an example citation that we provide with every data collection on the site. There's an investigator, the title, persistent ID, the place that is distributing it. And we really encourage people who are using data from our site to, post this or include this in publications where they use the data. These are the 5 things we recommend with every data citation: title, author, date, version, and some sort of persistent identifier. We use digital object identifiers just as long as it's persistent and can point back to the data source. The importance of doing this is an example of something recently published, a paper where they used AdHealth, a very significant study, and they cited it, which is great. But a few minor things, or major, depending on how you look at it, they didn't include a persistent identifier, so you're not quite sure which version of AdHealth that was used. It's not the citation, the full citation from the data isn't there, and then it's not at one specific place in the article, so it's not in the references section or even in a footnote. It's in a number of different places. So one of the benefits, though, of even though it's great that they reference the data, one of the benefits of using a standardized citation is that it makes it a lot easier for repositories, as well as some journal publishers are now creating these data citation indexes where they're pulling in citations. That when a citation, a standardized citation is used, especially with a persistent identifier, it really makes it a heck of a lot easier for a repository or whomever is collecting the citation to find it and retrieve it and then put it in a bibliography. We have a lot of experience here at ICPSR of doing this. We have a bibliography, a librarian who handles the bibliography, Elizabeth Moss, and it's really great when people who deposit data provide her with citations. Some people do it, some people don't. And so what she does is if you give her citations, she'll use that to populate our own internal bibliography, and that's a searchable database of data-related literature. She has, I think, over 65,000 citations. If people don't cite data, we still go out and look for it, but it's a very resource-intensive process. You can imagine it's sometimes almost like looking for a needle in a haystack. You're looking for citations and references. When there's a persistent identifier, we can do automated crawls or harvests. Google can actually notify us when it finds a citation using our DOI. And then again, one of the great things about citing and referencing data is that we as a repository can not only include it in our citation index and bibliography, but these bigger products, and I'm not necessarily endorsing this, but I'm showing this as promising and an opportunity out there that this data citation index, which goes out and collects citations from a large number of repositories, and makes it easier for people to find data. So I think I've emphasized that enough said there, but you know, really, anytime someone puts a citation in a publication, it's really wonderful, and it makes life a lot easier, not only for us, but for the investigators and for the funders. Access. So access is something that I could have talked about at the beginning, and maybe I should have, but I held off to put it here toward the end. Access really is providing search capabilities to data collections once they're in a repository, but also preparing for access at the very beginning of a data collection and when managing that data collection. And so on our access portion of our website, we talk about a couple of things. One, we've given a response and some guidance to the OSCP data access plans. And federal agencies are writing these up, but these are, I think, also useful for libraries and just for anyone who are working with data. We've talked about the different points of the public access plans, and so feel free to go out and look at the site. We have this, recently did a webinar about the response and the guidelines that's on YouTube. And for preparing for access, we have a large portion that talks about data management plans and what to do to create effective data management plans, plans that really prepare for the longevity of a data collection for long-term access preservation through archiving, and what to do to plan for that. These are on the site. This is the PDF of it. There are templates and tools. There's a framework, the recommended sections to include in the data management plans. And these really complement, I think, some of those data management templates that are out there. We're one of many resources and great resources, other resources out there that discuss data management plans. I should say Amy, who couldn't be on the call, does a lot of work in reaching out to investigators who are preparing data management plans, can talk them through questions they might have about what to include in a plan, pricing, costing out, what it would cost for them to prepare, to manage as well as archive the data collection, considerations to include in a budget, considerations to include in materials as well as staff when preparing and managing data. And the last thing I want to talk about is just this tools section, tools and services section on the site. This is something we put out there in the last year. And like I said before, if you have suggestions, we put up there some tools and services. This is from the restricted use data section. Actually mainly talk about the services that we provide. There's a tools section on data processing, where we recommend a few free or open source tools. One example is there's a tool called Collectica for Excel. It's free. You can use it. Basically, it's a plugin within Excel where you can open up SPSS and I believe it's data files, and then enhance them, actually add BDI and rich metadata within the files. It's a lightweight tool, really easy to use and access. Other tools are out there. If you know of some and you'd like to recommend some that feel free to send it to me, and I'm happy to post it. So again, I hope I've touched on a number of resources, both on our site and elsewhere, on what to do to manage and curate so that more and more data can be shared. And hopefully, over time, the trend of sharing data will increase. I really think that the key there is being able to help people to describe and enhance their data. And to do that, it's best to do that early on in the life cycle, early on in the process. And knowing about these resources and guidelines and guidance hopefully will be beneficial. Just a little plug, for the last few years, we've had a summer program course. We're going to be holding it again for a third year this summer, where we discuss a lot of these things. Briefly touched on here. It's a 5-day workshop. This is from a picture of our last summer. Weather was gorgeous. I can't always guarantee the weather will be gorgeous, but weather's usually nice in July. And it's a great experience not only to talk about these things, but also to connect with peers who are doing this type of work. We have data archivists, librarians, researchers, directors of libraries. Another course that we do every other year is a course on providing data services within libraries, and we'll be holding that this year as well. So with that, I'm going to leave you with the case I found on Flickr. Go forth and curate, and look forward to your questions. And just, again, thank you for taking the time today to be part of this. And feel free to contact me with any questions or recommendations offline. My email's here, and my number is, I think, on our website.
Thank you, Jared. I haven't seen a question typed in the chat box yet. Let's just say again that for the participants, you are welcome to type in the question in the chat box. And now I think Jared and I will both monitor the chat box to see whether you have a question and Jared can answer this. Since there's none, I haven't seen any yet. I just have a question, Jared.
Yeah, Ming Lu, would you be able to, I can't hear you as well in my headphones. Would you be able to get closer to the mic?
Okay.
Great, yeah.
It's better now? Okay, good. Yeah, my question is, according to your experience with the researchers, did you see any aspect that, like as librarians, what academic librarians can do to help the researchers when they submit their data, the data are well prepared, etc.? Did you have any suggestions to the librarians that some aspects that we can focus on, we can talk with the researcher, educate the researcher in our institutions?
Yeah, definitely. So one, I think with the data management planning, I've seen a large number of libraries that are taking steps, either hiring people or dedicating FTEs or individuals to work specifically on helping researchers with data management plans. I think having a librarian, a person who can be there and work with a researcher one-on-one and talk through some of these issues is really valuable, as opposed to having a web form, which can be useful, but having a person just makes that experience more tangible and can address some of those issues better, as well as can steer that researcher to repositories that are well placed or best for the data, whether it's the institutional repository or a domain repository or some other mechanism. As well, I should say, beyond data management, and maybe in connection to that, just helping them understand the basic points of what curation, data management are. libraries understand preservation, so addressing that with researchers, either one-on-one when they're preparing the data management plans or through workshops. I think institutional repositories are another mechanism that libraries can use to address data needs on campus. And so researchers might share their data with the institutional repository. And so if they know they're going to be shared at the library and they are working with them beforehand, if they don't know until they deposit it, I still think the librarians can do quite a bit to describe and prepare the data so that the data are in better condition or better position to be long-lived and usable over time. I think sometimes there's a tendency to just put an as-is data file with a reading file and just very, very basic metadata. A librarian can review that and might be able to catch the researcher at a good time or maybe even upon deposit and get tease some more information out of it.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Yeah, I haven't seen other questions. Yeah, I have another question about the metadata creation during the research process. To which level that we should suggest to the researcher to document their data analysis and data itself. I know when they deposit their data into ICPSR, you will provide some form for them to fill out in terms of the metadata field.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? And but when they are doing their research, how detailed that we should suggest to them to write the metadata for each of their files for the project? Yeah, I just when I help researchers, I tell them you keep as much as information as possible, document as much as possible. But is there any guidelines about what they should do? Just how much detail they should keep a record, so that when they put their data in the repository, they have enough information already collected to have a good metadata to go with the data together.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's the study level, the high-level metadata about the study, things from a title, summary, the abstract, to the methodology used. And that's kind of an overview of the collection that I think is useful to prepare. And usually you can do that at the end of the collection to summarize what you have. But there's the more detailed metadata at the file level, even at the variable level, that can be captured both in the stats packages, but also in this, maybe if they're doing a survey in the survey instrument. So you can capture, let's say, question text to variable and value value responses. All of that, the more you can capture and provide to us as an archive is very useful. If we're provided question text, we can incorporate that with the study, with the data collection, and that helps power our search. In fact, we have a separate search that goes through and checks the question text and the variables. The variables database is what it's called. So that, the more detail you can capture, the better. Sometimes there's a concern of how you capture that, because, for instance, the stats packages don't allow for capture of question text within the package itself. Sometimes there are ways around that. You can sometimes embed the question text in the variable label, but that's a workaround. There are tools out there. I think I mentioned Collective that have and again, I'm not endorsing any products, but it's a product I know about where they have a tool, a product that you can buy that will allow you to document studies at the variable level and capture that rich metadata. So, you know, the basic study level, high level documentation or metadata that you can capture is essential, and the more detailed the better. And then the variable level details is also incredibly useful if you can capture that and provide it to them. Or if you as a repository want to make available yourself.
Thank you, Jerry. There's a question come up from Jay Fry from the participants. Have you seen the question?
Yeah, hi Jane. Yeah. Great question, Jane. How do you price out long-term data preservation? So there's been some papers out there. I know the California Digital Library has a paper on costing, how they cost out preservation and curation. How we price it, one question, are you talking about data management planning? How do you price out and cost out data management planning? To do that, we look at size of files, number of variables, and as well as how clean the collections, how complicated the collections appear to be at the end of the collection, and then use that to cost out our curation and preservation costs. For us to price out long-term data preservation as an archive, I can't say we've done that on an individual file level. One thing to look at is cost of machinery, cost of servers. The other is to look at how much it costs to actually do the work. And so we really use cost it out. We pay for it through our membership services and allocate a certain portion of our budget for preservation activities each year. So I don't know if that answered your question specifically what you were looking for, but I hope I touched on at least both the data management aspect and as a repository and price them down.
Thank you, Jerry. There's another question.
Yeah, so it looks like, Jane, you were asking about budget. How about budgeting for grants? So it looks like you're asking about how do you price out long-term data preservation in your data management plan, which are budgeting for grants. Yeah, so the UK Data Archive has a resource on their website about how to cost out data management. And I think I mentioned, you know, size of the files, the number of files, if there are any disclosure issues. The short term, the quick answers, if you're thinking about depositing with ICPSR, talking with Amy Tienta, calling her up or emailing her. But the UK Data Archive has a great resource, and I have the website, but I can't find it right now. There was I think a similar question to that from Catherine McIntyre, asking if our library is a member of ICPSR paying an annual subscription, do we still pay for data preservation services? So, Catherine, I think you're asking also about data management plans and preparing data management plans. I should say, yeah, okay, you said yes. So, no, you wouldn't have to. So any data that are submitted and deposited with ICPSR are, and we accept and we process and preserve with our membership-based services are, it's free to deposit, and then the data are made freely available to our membership. And so if you would like for your data to be available to our members, and that's your intention, and that's what you plan for, then no, it wouldn't cost anything to have us curate it and preserve it for the long term, if you're a member or even if you're not a member. But keep in mind that only the membership, I mean, it's a large, very large group of people at over 700 large and small institutions around the world would be able to access it. But if you would like for your data to be made available publicly to anybody, meaning even non-members, then it is useful. You would need to allocate some of your budget to pay for that, to make it publicly accessible or open access. The other aspect is if you can budget in some costs into your grant when preparing your data management plan. Sometimes it will help us do more to enhance your data collection, to add more features, maybe fully enhance the descriptive metadata or the question text on that file, something that we try to do with all of our collections, but don't always have the chance to. And then I think if you can budget resources, it might bring a dedicated processor so that the time it takes to enhance and curate and release your data would be a shorter period of time. It wouldn't go into our standard queue. But I hope that answers your question, Catherine. The short answer is no, you wouldn't have to budget, but it certainly helps to ensure that your data are enhanced even further, and that if you want to make them reach even more people than the traditional route.
Right, good. Yeah, I didn't see further questions. So I think we can close our webinar. Thank you very much, Jerry, for the presentation. And thank you all the participants for attending the webinar. Yeah, Alison, are you there? We can finish the recording. And yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Ming. Thanks, Alison. Thanks, everyone.